Welcome, everyone, to today's session about building back better through gender equitable leadership in global health workforce. As we get started with today's session, a little bit of housekeeping. One, we want to make sure that you're aware that this is actually being recorded. Second, we invite all of you to really use the question and answer section of the platform, and please send us your questions particularly. Second, we also really want to encourage you to introduce yourself as well. So please use the chat function to introduce yourself, which organization you're from, and if you'd like us to know what brings you to this particular section. And finally, we want you to engage with us in social media. So if you are tweeting or using any of the other social media platforms, please use hashtag women, the number 4 Mediterranean. And the other hashtag we encourage you to use for this particular session is hashtag Gender Equity Hub. Please tag the World Health Organization, the UfM Secretariat, and Women in Global Health and the Global Health Workforce Network. On that note, I'd like to again welcome you to today's session where we really focus on building back better through gender equitable leadership in global health workforce. So a couple of things that I want all of us to really be aware of is that women are 70% of the global health workforce, but they only occupy 25% of the leadership roles. Today, we're going to be discussing about why, those barriers exist and how can we really address those barriers. And we know that it has a lot to do with both power and how power is distributed. Gender leadership gaps are driven by stereotypes, discrimination, power imbalance, and privilege. We also know that women's disadvantages are multiplied by other identities such as race, class, socioeconomic status, religion, and being from other minority groups. We really must take an intersectional approach when we're talking about women's leadership, particularly when it comes to the health and social workforce. We also need to realize the critical role that women play when it comes to providing health and social protection. As we know, COVID-19 has not only reminded us of how vulnerable our health systems are and societies are, but it's magnified the existing inequalities that we've known. COVID-19 is showing us the critical role that women provide in ensuring that we have social protection and strong, resilient health systems. But as far as whether they have decent and safe work conditions, whether they are getting to shape the decision making, or whether they're even compensated, these are all issues that need to be addressed and further worked on. Today, we'll be really focusing on the theme of leadership and making sure that women are part of the decision-making process when it comes to health systems and shaping society. We know that when women are engaged in decision-making, that leads to much more of an inclusive agenda being presented. We know that when we have gender equal teams, decision-making bodies, not only will we have more sustainable solutions, but we also will have more ethical solutions. And so today's session will be looking very much on what are the policy tools that we can use in a variety of contexts to advance women's leadership, especially in the health and social workforce. And finally, women leaders will help us achieve universal health coverage, and it will strengthen health for all. We know that gendered leadership gaps in health are a barrier to reaching the Sustainable Development Goals and universal health coverage. So if we truly have gender equitable leadership in both the health and social workforce, we will also have a multiplier effect, not only achieving the health SDG, but also many of the other SDGs. So on that note, I'm delighted to welcome our first two speakers, beginning with Mirna Abi Abdallah Dumat. She is a founding associate professor and assistant dean from the Lebanese American University School of Nursing. Welcome, Mirna.
And I would like to mention my other role. I'm the president of the Order of Nurses in Lebanon. And I think under this pandemic and under all what happened in Lebanon, I don't think it's a good time for male or females to be in leadership position, because since October 2019, and we've been living tragedy after tragedy in Lebanon. Can I have my PowerPoint, please? Can I have my PowerPoint?
Yes, we do see it on the screen now.
Okay. So the title Okay, so the title of my presentation, I did not change the title of this webinar, but I added to it lesson learned Eagles. So the way I practice my leadership, it's something that I learned from Eagles. Next, please. Next slide. Okay, as I have said, since October 2019, and in Lebanon, we've been living one tragedy following the other. So October 17 was the revolution. Nurses could not reach their workplace. We had to pass over fire. Nurses started to be led off from hospitals. And then we had the February 2020 when the COVID-19 started. As Order of Nurses, we were the first to start training in the country, even before we had the first case of COVID-19. But despite all this, hospitals, healthcare system, they were not ready for this pandemic. And as nurses, we are the frontliners. So we had to fight and the unknown for the first few weeks or months. Then followed by March, April 2020, on top of all this, we had the economic crash. So our money lost its value and the salary of nurses became peanuts for those who are getting paid, because of the economic crash, nurses were laid off, nurses were working without being paid. Their salary, they were paying them half salary, and I'm talking about $100 or $150 maximum per month. I'm not talking about big salaries because our currency lost its value. Then to top all this, we had the August 4 Beirut blast. I don't know if you have heard about it, but it was a very big explosion. It was mentioned as the third biggest explosion in the whole world. Next slide, please. So before I go any further, I need to thank, because I'm running against time, the organizers for giving me this opportunity to talk about nursing leadership in Lebanon. But also I would like to congratulate all nurses, because this year is the year of the nurse and International Year of the Nurse. It's true that we did not celebrate in a positive manner, but again, with the COVID, we proved, and with all what is happening in Lebanon, we proved that we are the backbone of the healthcare system. Next. So the first lesson, or the first thing that I've learned from eagles, is that eagles fly alone and at high altitude. So I learned to stay away from narrow-minded people. That brings me down, and I always try to keep good company, to make new acquaintances that could help the Order of Nurses, that could help nurses in Lebanon to get better to be on the decision-making table and to improve the status of nursing. Next. The second lesson that I've learned is eagles have an accurate vision, which means I try to always to remain focused regardless of the obstacles, and I cannot name now all the obstacles that I faced during my mandate as president of the Order of Nurses for the past 2 years. And I kept myself focused, and so far I was able to achieve what I wanted to achieve, and to put nursing, despite all odds, at the decision-making table, and try to get as much rights as possible for our Lebanese nurses. Next. The third lesson is about eagles that do not eat dead things. They only feed on fresh prey. So I never relied on my past accomplishments. Every time I achieve something, I forget about it and I try to build on it, and I keep on looking for new frontiers to conquer. So always, every week, I have something new. I have something new to achieve after finishing, of course, the previous one. So, and everything I do is for the benefit of the Lebanese nurses. Then lesson number 4, eagles love the storm. So I'm trying to make our nurses think and behave like this. So we're not afraid of challenges. We search for challenges because every challenge we try to learn something new out of it. And in fact, we are learning from all the challenges, and we are trying to improve our leadership style, our communication, the way we are communicating our news to the Lebanese people and to the world outside. Lesson number 5. So when a female eagle meets a male eagle, she tests him for commitment. So I always try before I have any partnership, I try for the nurses and for the other order, for example. So we are trying to build a new partnership with key people that will help our message reach the people that we want them to reach. Lesson number 6, please, next slide. Is it 6? I'm not seeing. Lesson number 6 is eagles prepares for training. So leave your comfort zone because there is no growth there. And as nurses, we know that we have a unique understanding of the healthcare system. So we always need not to be satisfied of working within the walls of a hospital. We need to go outside the hospitals. We need to understand the highly complex nature of policy influence. We need to be involved in policy making, and if we want our voice to be heard. So I'm trying to get our nurses have webinars, training, workshops for them regarding policy, regarding communication, how to speak to media, just to go outside the clinical area where we feel that it's our cocoon and it's our comfort zone. So next. Lesson number 7, when the eagle grows older, they hurt themselves for new feathers. So we always try at the order, and I always try to shed off the old habits. And
Mirna, we're having a difficult time hearing you.
We keep on going on. Last slide. Last slide. Next. Next, please. Next. So what I want to say next, no, there is one. I want to say that the only bird that dares to peck at an eagle is the crow. I have a picture here. It's not put on the, please, can you put it on the PowerPoint? And the crow sits on the back and bites the neck of the eagle. However, the response of the eagle is not to fight with the crow, but instead of wasting the time and energy on the crow, the eagle opens its wings and begins to rise higher in the heavens. And the higher the flight, the harder it is for the crow to breathe, and then the crow will fall due to lack of oxygen. And I think as nurse leaders, as female leaders, this is how we should behave. We should not be listening to the many crows that we may face. We have to keep on performing and achieving high and high until they fall alone. And I would like to just to give a brief idea that in Lebanon, 80% of the nursing, almost 80% of the nursing workforce are females and 20% are males, though we are inviting more males to be with us in the profession. And thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Myrna, for a very interesting presentation about leadership. But, when you opened, you really shared the hard realities that nurses, especially nurses, are working in Lebanon, and the numbers that you were sharing about the pay aspect. I think that really touches upon some of the deeper issues of gender inequity that exist in the health sector. And so today's conversation is very much about how do we drive gender transformative policy action to address these root inequities that exist, and hearing about your leadership journey and how you are working with nurses locally, especially Lebanese nurses, to instill strong values of leadership and engaging and contributing to decision making is all very moving. So I'd like to turn to and we'll be coming back to you during the chat section. I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Anne Keeling. She is the Senior Fellow of Women in Global Health. Anne has a 35 career in global health and social development. She has posts including in Pakistan, Papua New Guinea, Indonesia, the Caribbean, and she is currently the chair of the NGO Age International. She also has decades of experience working on leadership in multiple settings, from global institutions to the community level. So Anne, we turn to you to present on gender equity and global health leadership, good for women, good for health.
Thank you, Rupa. Could I have my PowerPoint, please? Can I have my PowerPoint? Okay, great. Thank you. Next slide. Next slide. Great. So I'd like to talk to you today about some work that's being done by the WHO Gender Equity Hub of the Global Health Workforce Network. That is a group co-chaired by the WHO and Women in Global Health. It's a group of experts which come together to look at gender equity in the health and social workforce. In 2019, we produced a landmark report, and the clue is in the title. It's called Global Health Delivered by Women, Led by Men. And it's really the first major literature review of gender and equity in the health workforce. And one of the themes that we looked at was leadership. In March of this year, we produced a discussion paper setting out the issues on leadership in the sector. And as a group, we've conducted further analysis and are now producing a working paper on what works to enable gender equal leadership in global health. And I would like here just to credit two of my colleagues in the Gender Equity Hub, Dr. Kavita Bhatia from India and Maha Khan from Chicago, who've done an awful lot of work towards this. Next slide, please. Looking at the findings on leadership specifically from the Delivered by Women, Led by Men report, maybe no surprises. Gender leadership gaps are driven by stereotypes, discrimination, power imbalance, and privilege. Women's disadvantage intersects with and is multiplied by other identities, such as race and class. It's critical we take an intersectional approach, although a lot of the data that we need is actually missing. Global health is weakened by excluding women's talent, ideas, and knowledge. Women leaders, particularly political leaders, often expand the health agenda and strengthen health for everybody. And the gendered leadership gaps in health is a serious barrier to reaching the SDGs and universal health coverage. And there along the side is that 70%, 25% paradox. Women are 70% of the health workforce, but only 25% of the leadership. Next slide, please. And this is why. So this is the women stuck in the global health talent pipeline. There is no shortage of women in this field. There's no shortage of expert women. Women are the experts in this field. But men still have a fast track to leadership. And that's even the case in nursing, where women are 90% of the profession. Next slide. And regrettably, we've seen the same pattern repeated in COVID-19. It's an emergency, ? Men know best. And we have a pandemic, which is delivered by women on the front lines and again led by men. And here's some data from Women in Global Health that 85% of 114 national task forces on COVID-19 have majority male membership. And yet at the political level, we're hearing a lot of praise. We're hearing good reports from women-led countries. We have yet to see how this will all play out because this pandemic is far from over. But then if you look at it at the that bottom figure, we have a very small sample of female headed governments. It's only 12 out of 195 countries in the world. Next slide, please. I'm going to say that there are 3 decisions that I can put on the table today that were probably not made by women, and that if women had been the majority of the task forces in those countries, these decisions would not have been made. Number 1, treating maternal and reproductive health services as not essential in a pandemic. We have plenty of lessons from Ebola and other pandemics that when that is done, when pregnancy doesn't stop for a pandemic and women die. Secondly, modeling health worker PPE, personal protective equipment on the male body, so it simply doesn't fit many women, and it exposes them to infection. Amazing. Did women make that decision? I don't think so. And thirdly, locking down domestic violence victims with their abusers in unsafe homes, making the assumption that every home is a safe home for women, despite the fact that we know that's not. And the results of these 3 decisions, when this pandemic is over, will be counted in the costs of women's deaths. Next slide. So how do we fix this? How are we going to get gender parity in global health leadership, in health and social sector leadership? Next slide, please. Next slide. What we're looking at is a whole ecosystem. What we need to change is everything from at the top of that ecological model there. We've got public policy factors, we've got legal frameworks, we've got community factors, gender norms, gender stereotypes. Recent UNDP study that 50% think men make better political leaders. We have interpersonal factors, sexual harassment at work, and we come right down to the individual factors that impact on women. Imposter syndrome is one example. And a lot of the work that has been done on getting women into leadership, or at least supporting women into leadership, has been about trying to fit women into systems which are basically discriminatory systems and don't welcome women. So it's been about fixing women. Next slide, please. So the work that we're doing now with the Gender Equity Hub, we're looking at a framework for change, and we're looking at 4 action areas. Building a foundation for equality, which will include laws, policies that are absent in so many countries. Addressing social norms and stereotypes, many of which don't start inside the health workforce, they actually exist outside. We need to fix workplace systems and culture and not try to fix women. And we need to put in place measures to enable women to achieve. Next slide, please. So I want to leave with 6 key messages that we can't fix this issue by trying to fix women. We actually have to fix a whole system. Secondly, that inequality is systemic, and this pipeline isn't going to unblock itself without deliberate action at all levels. And thirdly, leadership matters. Equality and diversity are probably the one issue that no leader can delegate to anybody else. All leaders have to be gender transformative leaders. They have to take this on as their issue. This is not simply a women's issue. Transparency matters. getting the data which is so absent, intersectional data, getting gender pay gap data. There is so much data missing. We would like to come out of this pandemic, for example, with decent data, looking at the impact of female leadership at all levels in this pandemic. It'll be interesting to see whether we manage to achieve that. Fourthly, we're looking at going beyond gender parity. This isn't just about counting numbers of men and women. It matters what they do. It matters who those women are, but it also matters who the men are, and it matters what they do. So we're looking for all leaders to be gender transformative leaders, and to be addressing all forms of inequality in the workplace, including gender equality. This is everybody's business. Fifthly, we don't need to ask permission because member states have already made agreements in the Beijing Platform for Action, in the SDGs, in the political declaration from last year's high-level meeting on universal health coverage. Commitments have been made. It's now about accountability, and it's about member states in particular and other large organizations delivering on the promises that have been made. And finally, gender equal leadership in global health is most definitely the foundation for UHC, strong health systems and global health security. And I think if anyone wanted proof of concept, then COVID-19 has given us that. And it's now very critical that we sort out this leadership deficit right now. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Anne, for just providing that overview and, clear message there that we really need to take the conversation from fixing women to fixing systems. There is a need for greater transparency, a need for filling the data gap, and really data that comes to implementation research, data that goes into lower middle income countries, when it comes to women's leadership, and really having an intersectional approach. And we know that this is not only the right thing to do, it's a smart thing to do and needed for universal health coverage. Again, not new promises. We're asking for the old promises to be actually translated into action. So, on that note, I'd like to welcome our panelists who are leading global health leaders that are going to be bringing into this conversation perspectives from a wide range of experiences. I'd like to first invite Ambassador Pavi Silanaki. She is currently the Ambassador for Health and Well-Being at the Ministry for Foreign Affairs of Finland. But even more than that, she brings, again, decades of experience working at top-level managerial positions in the public sector. She has navigated not only in the European Union, but also is currently a member of the WHO Executive Board. So Pavi, as I turn to you, how can governments support women's leadership when it comes to the health and social workforce?
Thank you, Rupa. And I'm so happy to be here now. And these are really important discussions that we are having here now, but also that you keep going on actively to have this issue on the table here, also during the COVID-19 pandemic. Governments can do really a lot. They can provide them possibilities for all. And I would say that taking example of my own country, Finland. So Finland gave then a voting right for women, first in Europe and third globally, year 1906. And the first woman parliamentarian then began 1907. So it's so important that we have really women in parliaments also, and we have seen also here that in those countries that we have also women there making decisions, it is, as we have heard, much more sustainable, and we have then all the potential in use. And Finland was quite a poor country then in 1950s, and from 1960s there have been systematic work going on from parliament and government then to try to have everyone's potential deployed in our society. So we have had then universal health coverage. We have had access to education, so everyone have free access to education, but also for those social and health services they need, and that is in our constitution. It's very powerful that we have it in our legislation, and then it is not due to what kind of economical situation it is in your family. Then there is then possibility to go to schools. And of course, if we think about decision making, we think about then leadership positions, and also corporate governance and corporate executive boards. So there is need for education and possibilities for education, but also to be able to work at the different positions, to be really able to go up to the most highest positions. And their government then can give possibilities for women then to combine family and career. And I'm also an example of that. I have two lovely sons, which are already 24 and 26, and I have had possibility then to be a mother, but also to then build my career. And one reason for that is that we have high quality and inexpensive daycare, which is also for municipalities, they have to then provide it. So everyone has the right. It's not about the economical situation in the family. So there is right, and then we have also mother and parental leaves. We are now taking dads more to that also. That is, I think that also important that we try to then keep possibilities for and keep men also in these processes, so that they share then and give their share also to the family work, and it's really great for them also to have the possibility to get to know their children and be with them. So daycare and education is so important that we have. And we have also had school meals, even from 1960s, we have had them also, so that women working outside their home, they know that children get really warm, good quality meal during their school days. That is also healthy, and we can educate them how the healthy meal looks like, and also at our working places we have that possibility that it's cheaper for us to eat their healthy meal. So there is a kind of infrastructure for that it is possible for women then to participate into working life, to have the possibility and access to education, but also to working life. And it is so important also for sustainable societies that there are children, so that's why it's important that women has the possibility then. But then we need also legislation to ensure that there is then enough women also participating in the decision making. And we have Equality Act that includes a quota provision that applies to state administration committees, advisory boards, working groups, and other similar bodies, as well as municipal boards, committees, and intermunicipal cooperation bodies. We have to have at least 40% of both men and women. So these quotas ensure that also during the crisis, different non-elected decision-making bodies have both men and women in them. Nowadays, we have, and as I mentioned, we had the first woman parliamentarian, then 1907. Now we have 58% at present government, the proportion of women. So it's quite gender balanced there. So there are some examples of what governments can do, and now we see that we have multi-party government, and all the 5 parties we have in our current government are led by women. So that is quite exceptional, and they are quite young. Most of them. So that also shows that young women are interested to be in high positions, and many of them have small children, and also their men at the work. So it's really possible to share the responsibility, but also have both career and family. I think that's give us then also good life. Thank you, Rupa.
Great. Thank you, Pavi, for just really proving that women can be in leadership roles, they can do well, and that it can actually create a ecosystem where women are, again, engaging at all levels. And, you opened your comments very much about the importance of having women in political leadership and having laws that ensure that women are in those decision-making roles. Then you touched upon the ecosystem that really creates an enabling environment and what we call really a gender transformative policies that really ensure that women are not having to take on those barriers without necessarily having societal protections, including childcare, having. I'm hearing some background noise. If you could please mute, thank you. And really also about the fact that this benefits all genders, so that gender equality is truly seen as a benefit for men and women and all genders. And I think that is a really critical point to emphasize, that we're not asking for something that just benefits women, but it actually benefits all of society when we truly are gender equal. And a really great example of how gender norms and roles have already started to shift in Finland, to the fact that women are now in majority of leadership roles. So we'll be coming back to you, Pavi, to touch upon that in a moment. But I'd like to turn to a different part of the world and a different perspective to invite Mariam Begdeli, who is the WHO representative from Morocco. She is also a pharmacist by training, holds a doctorate in public health from the Free University of Brussels. She started her career in Médecins Sans Frontières, and also has been working at headquarters in Geneva of the World Health Organization and the Department of Governance and Financing for Systems Health. So Mariam, you have experience especially in the multilateral United Nations system. We know that the United Nations is a very traditional institution where there are challenges for women getting to the most senior leadership roles. But, we'd like to hear from you directly from the perspective of what is the role of the World Health Organization in making sure that women have an equal say in decision-making in health systems. And if you can touch upon a little bit about the on-ground realities of what it is like working at the country level as well. To you, Mariam, welcome.
Thank you, Rupa. Do you hear me? Thank you very much to all the organizers for this very interesting and thoughtful discussion. I think this is really important that at this point in time we organize this kind of debates around the role of women in global health. Your question, Rupa, is extremely interesting. It mixes a little bit the gender issue in WHO as an organization and the role of WHO in that leadership, gender leadership around the world. So I'm going to share with you a little bit of my experience about that. I think that reflecting on my position as a WHO representative in Morocco, when I of course there is in any organization, WHO I don't think is an exception. a gender imbalance that we see in reflected in the distribution of women in the WHO workforce. I don't think it's a mystery. We know that we have still a lot of women, more women than men, in the administrative functions. And as we go into up in these administrative functions, there is a gender imbalance towards men. And then in the technical functions, again, we have the same kind of imbalance, with the lower positions being more occupied by women in the leadership. I think that there is a willingness from Dr. Tedros, since he arrived, to change this, to nominate a lot of women in leadership position, in the senior position within the organization, in Geneva and elsewhere. Now, this is where I came from when 3 years ago I moved to Morocco, and this is the spirit that the organization and the transformation has now. But there's a lot of difference from one region to the other, and confronted with the environment in Morocco, there is this imbalance is still there, and it's much more visible than it is in the global arena. It is visible in the global arena, but I think it's much more visible in the at the country level. And this is despite policies that exist, that it even embedded in the Moroccan constitution, ratified in Morocco to confirm the principles of equal rights and parity, and the government equality plans that are put in place by the Ministry of Solidarity, Women, Family and Social Development. There is, for example, an annual gender report that complements the budget law in Morocco, and that's a mandatory report that needs to be put forward when the budget law is presented. So these are the policies that are in place, and the result of that is that you do see a feminization of the public health workforce. You do have more and more women entering into medical education. This has grown quite rapidly over the past years. You see that on average, and depending on the professions, you can have almost 60% of the health workforce which is feminine. But as my colleagues already said, the previous speakers already said, this goes with quite an imbalance in terms of the leadership positions that women are occupying in the country. And therefore, as a WHO representative in Morocco, it often happens that I am in a men's circle when we are in a panel discussion or in an official representation. So we do see that there is a lot of efforts that has been done in the country to promote the role of women. We have a lot of policies that are in place, but I think that there are still a number of things that need to be addressed to make this really happen for every woman in the health workforce. There is a recent study, I'll finish with that, there's a recent study on expectations from midwives during the COVID-19 in Morocco. And there are a number of things that are coming up from this study. Of course, the professional load is important because of the emergency situation and the fact that the health facilities are overloaded, and the midwives are particularly solicited to take care of pregnancies during this time. But they also express emotional charge. They express family concerns. They express challenges in collaborating with their colleagues. they express a lot of exhaustion, and they refer to their working conditions as being some of the big challenges that they face. And one of the issues is also how do they manage to participate in HR decisions while they are facing all these challenges with their work, with their collaboration, and at home. How do they let the participatory decisions to men, the participatory processes to men, because they are just overloaded by work and at home. And it's not like the participatory process, for example, in policy design or in HR action designs are limited to men. It's because of the difference in terms of workload and the family work, family load, and emotional charge that they are facing, that they may not be able to actually meaningfully participate in these participatory processes. And then there are also the issues related to the multi-sectoral approaches that are needed to be able to promote women in leadership. And it's not just, policies are in place in the health sector, but are they in place in the other sectors? How do we make sure that women are protected in the rural areas? How do we make sure that they are protected in the poorer communities in terms of their personal safety, but also in terms of speaking out, in terms of being able to express their opinions, to express their preferences, to express to have a voice. So these are a few issues, a few challenges that women face in terms of being able to go above that glass ceiling that we all know, particularly in the context of Morocco.
Great. Thank you, Miriam, for just a very fascinating overview. And, this last point that you really brought out, the fact of like, what are those enabling aspects and having a multi-sectorial perspective on it. We often hear women just need to lean in. Your message is clear that how can women lean in if they are already overworked, overburdened, and not resourced and not supported, and that there is a need to look at all the sectors that and the different communities and looking at it from an intersectionality perspective. Again, looking at the difference between rural women, women from a lower socioeconomic, poorer backgrounds. So just a really powerful message there, Miriam. We'll be coming back to you to just, share a little bit more about some of the solutions that you would, recommend, especially from a cultural context that it requires looking at things from the context-specific approach. So I'd like to actually invite our next speaker, Francesca Colombo. She is the head of Health Division at OECD, which is the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. Francesca is responsible for working on health and particularly providing international comparable data on health systems, applying an economic analysis to health policies, advising policymakers, and also really making sure that stakeholders and citizens respond to the demands for more and better health. And Francesca, your work is most recently also looking at closing some of the gender gaps that exist in the health sector. So I'd like to turn it to you to share a little bit with us what policy options has the OECD seen as effective in increasing women's leadership when it comes to the health and social workforce.
Yeah, sure. And thank you very much. Thank you for the very powerful speakers that came before me. I think there is a lot of convergence in terms of what is needed. I think the very first point I would like to make, and it's probably something that you can expect from an economic organization, but what policies work is, first of all, by considering issues related to gender equality and filling in the gender gaps in the health workforce, but I will add also more broadly, not just from a human perspective, from a fairness perspective, from an equity perspective, but also from an economic perspective, because that equality is and equality in a leadership role is essential in economic terms. And it goes back to what I think Anne was mentioning in terms of the talents. in the end, we are facing with a massive amount of challenges ahead, which are becoming even more important with the COVID-19 crisis, which has hit so much the health sector, but obviously will have consequences for economies and societies. And it's just very simple as that you need to have all the hands that you have and making sure that you use the talent which is available in the best possible way if you want to make sure that you can address those challenges. So there are really very important economic benefits by having much more gender equal leadership role. Not just a gender equality in terms of numbers, but in terms of really what men and women do, just and simply because there is a need for using whole hands, and because the evidence shows that the more diversified you have that perspective and that workforce, the more you are able to successfully deal with the challenges that you have. So a more diverse workforce in terms of gender, I would add also in terms of other dimensions, whether they're ethnic, whether they're related to underrepresented groups, that makes a huge difference in terms of addressing the solution. So I think that's the very first point which I would like to make, and policies which are trying to address this issue, taking that consideration in mind, are obviously very important and have been essential to the success. The second point which I want to make, which very much builds, I think, on what Pavi mentioned in her very powerful experience, what she was telling about, what has been important to the Finnish experience. We need to take a perspective which is, yes, for help, but actually situates within the broader policy approaches. And the issues of having gender-sensitive packages of policies, it's fundamental. And clearly, if you want to have a more equality in terms of leadership and representations, you need to start by making sure that women as well as men have the same opportunities. And that has to do with giving them the possibility to have alternative to public care arrangements, to having a possibility for sharing caring responsibilities, public childcare options, even financial subsidies to employers so that they can make sure that there is paid leave. All of these environment which has to do with employment, the employment environment which women and men also operate, flexible working arrangements and support. Those are fundamental to give the opportunity for women to exercise not just their profession, but really then to move on into their career progression. And this has to do also in moments in which, the current times, obviously there are a number of people that face stress at work. Potentially they might lose jobs. Clear in the case of the health workforce, they're more in terms of the stress of having too much work to do. So the type of support that is given in this context is fundamental to be able to exercise more roles of the responsibilities. There are issues also about the way we go about policies more broadly in terms of having really a gender impact assessments of processes and policies which are put in place, to what extent are policies succeeding also in achieving goals or more integration of women into leadership positions, which are particularly useful and important. There are then, as a third set of points which I wanted to make, things that relate obviously more to specifically to the health sector, which have to do with the culture starting from the medical school, the training, the way there are certain gender roles which are somehow engendered into even the culture of training and medical schools, even issues about tackling some of the gender digital divides, which are very important because digital technologies and digital intensive future is very important in the context of health jobs moving forward. So if we start with having, even in the concept of training and medical school, gender divides in terms of digital skills, that will have consequences moving forward. I think there are issues which are important in terms of, and it was mentioned very much, of tackling gender norms gender stereotypes, nurses versus doctors, but even within the professions, surgeons versus other type of specialties. Those must be very much addressed, including from training, but also through the way workforce is organized. And definitely the issues of equal pay comes into play. There are differences in pay, there are pay gaps, even within the same specialties, which take place between men and women, with women generally earning less than men do, even but for doing the same type of job. I think a special attention needs to be paid also to non-standards and part-time work, which is much more prevalent for obvious reasons for in the case of women, but that are really some barriers to opportunities to build more gender profession progressions and also more gender equality. So I'll probably stop in there. There are further last points, things that can be done when looking at decision-making roles, both in the public and the private sector, encouraging, for example, voluntary targets in boardrooms, in even having a more gender-balanced composition of committees, health committees, decision-making bodies into the health sector, steering groups and so forth. These are obviously things that can help make a difference. So those are, my broader points. I think we need to start from the bigger perspective, looking at also the economic rationale for achieving more equalities, tackling this by addressing the wider perspective of labor markets and making sure that the possibility to combine a career with paid job, and then addressing perhaps specific issues which are relevant for the health sector.
Thank you, Francesca, for really providing that holistic overview and driving home the point about the economic, case and investment aspect of it. So we know that you will have to leave us soon, but just one question for you, particularly for those that are still not convinced and feel like working on gender equality is actually a cost. Can you share with us how you see working on gender equality as actually an investment? You alluded to the fact of the labor market. From the OECD perspective, how do we convince those that are not convinced that actually gender equality leads to economic growth and broader development?
Yeah, sure. I mean, there is lots of economic analysis that really shows that once you have a more diversified, more diverse health workforce, a more gender equal workforce, that has consequences for the possibility for the growth, but really for the success even of firms and so forth. I don't have the numbers to present to you right now straight away, but it's quite clear that the gaps exist, even in terms of how much women earn. Generally, like 15% or 20% less than what men do, less representative in boardroom seats. And I think it's quite fundamental to address these issues if we want to make sure that we really are serious about addressing inequalities in gender.
Great. Well, thank you, Francesca, for really making that link between economic development and gender, and particularly being very insightful about having set targets and policies when it comes to the leadership aspect. So I'd like to invite our next speaker, Dr. Andreas Ulrich. He is the advisor on global women health policies at Charité in Germany, Berlin. He is also coordinating international knowledge transfer platforms for prevention and management of women cancers. Before that, he had a long career at the World Health Organization, including the headquarters in Geneva, where he shaped the WHO Global Cancer Control Strategy by engaging all relevant WHO programs at headquarters really around this work. So, Andreas, I would really like to turn to you. How has the lack of women's leadership affected the response in COVID-19? And if you can ground it in the realities that we are currently seeing.
Super. Thank you very much for your nice introduction. I would like also to thank the UfM Secretariat, in particular the Cluster of Social Affairs, for having arranged this fantastic conference. We are hooked in a side event with partners of WHO, OECD, ILO, and others. If you remember what Ann Keeley has brought into with data and analysis of literature, there are three main areas which are the impact of COVID on women's health because of the lack of leadership. One is the downgrading of essential services for women, contraception, attended birth, sexual and reproductive health interventions, which has a major impact on the women's health as a consequence. So lack of leadership means also a huge impact on women's health, including also the lack of protective equipment for nurses and in the forefront of in the primary health care in managing the COVID crisis. And not last, we have a major problem with considering home is not always a safe place, and violence against women is a major issue which need to be addressed. I think this is very, very clear in terms of what is the problem. And if you permit, I would like also to talk about solutions to overcome that lack of leadership, but also how to manage and rebuild health systems after the COVID crisis in the context of the Union for the Mediterranean political space. And I think we have a huge opportunity because we have this platform of 40 countries, means European and North African, Middle East and Balkany countries sitting in one board and deciding about what's next. And all this, what we are doing here with this high-level conference dates back to a ministerial conference in Cairo in 2017 called Empowerment of Women in the Mediterranean Region. So there's an upstream political will to include women empowerment and health system strengthening into the political agenda of the member states, means across the Mediterranean region. So I think that's very important to keep in mind, that we are operating now in a region which is quite diverse. However, we have a common cultural history, and we have the vicinity of the countries, a lot of political and economic links around the Mediterranean Sea. So we should use, and we are about to use this platform for implementation. I would like to refer that at the same conference we have a session on violence against women as a joint project of WHO and UfM, just approved by the UfM board, by all the 40 member states. So it's timely that we have hooked in this project in the COVID crisis. We started to work on that joint project prior to the COVID crisis, but we have it now hooked in, and it's an opportunity to join efforts and to do substantial work in the countries affected by the COVID crisis. I think now with my Charité hat as academia, I also would like to mention that we have a platform. We will try to, and we are working on a hospital partnership network around the Mediterranean region, in particular Morocco and other countries, Northern Africa, to develop training programs for nurses and for specialized doctors in women health and women cancer. So we can use as an academia platform also to overcome knowledge gaps, to develop exchange of experience and training in women health leadership. So I think we have various opportunities now with this regional context of the Union of the Mediterranean, with the European Commission, a strong partner of that, to use the power and the partnership of, in particular, of ILO, WHO, and OECD in working for health, to translate now these strategies into the regional context with the support of all the partners of UfM and WHO. Thank you. Over to you.
Great. Thank you, Andreas, for just really highlighting the important and critical role of partnerships and how partnerships can be leveraged to achieve the agenda of gender equality and women's leadership, and as well as the health agenda. And there is a lot of power in partnerships. So this acknowledgement of the new relationship that's been formed with UfM and WHO is one that we all should really be leveraging. So thank you for highlighting that, Andreas. I'd like to turn to Christiana Wiskow, who is the Senior Health Specialist in the Sectorial Policies Department at the International Labour Organization, ILO. And ILO is an organization that promotes rights at work and encourages decent employment opportunities, and is also a critical part of enhancing social protection and strengthening social dialogue as part of the SDGs, and particularly Sustainable Development Goal 8. Christiana, I would like to turn to you. How does gender equity and leadership fit into ILO's decent work agenda for the health and social workforce?
Thank you very much, Rupa, and thank you, dear colleagues who have already spoken very powerfully on all the aspects on gender equity. And I can directly link to what Andreas said. Partnerships are very important, and I would like to encourage, when we talk about leadership in the health sector, not only to look into the health sector within the health sector, because it's not the health sector that can solve all the problems. It's as Anne said, we have to fix the whole system. We have to fix workplace systems, and that, of course, is a big mandate of the ILO, the International Labour Organization, fixing workplaces and making them decent, what we call decent, so that people have fair pay and equal opportunities. So gender equality is a big issue within the ILO mandate. We have several conventions, and also Anne referred to the importance of legislation, and Heavy as well. So we have 190 conventions that turn into legal instruments when they are ratified by countries. And two of them are, two of the 8 fundamental conventions refer to gender aspects, and that is equal remuneration and discrimination in employment and occupation. There are more instruments like that, but I would like to encourage everyone to look beyond the health system and look less, as Francesca said, into the broader system, and Anne also referred to it, and see how policies have to be fixed at the entire economic and labor market aspect to also address the health issues, the health sector workplace. The ILO has been doing that for a long while. We have been working with WHO, of course, very long, and also with OECD. Andreas referred to the Working for Health program that is actually addressing, among others, the gender equality aspect in the health employment. Because the UN High-Level Commission on Health Employment and Economic Growth that issued its report with 10 recommendations in 2016, saying that one of the issues is that we have to maximize women's talents and empower women to participate in the labor force. But beyond the health sector, we also have a gap in women participation in the global labor force of also 26%. And I want to make one important point that was maybe not yet mentioned by the others. That is what I believe is really, really critical in changing slowly but persistently, is the representation of women. not only in leadership positions, but from the very start. So you may know that there is the Nursing Personnel Convention that was adopted in 1977, so 40 years ago, and also made a point already that nurses should participate in nursing policy decisions and how nursing services are being created and shaped. The same is for women. A lot of my colleagues that have been speaking have referred also to the importance of balancing work and family life. And actually, I think that the work life starts at home. We see that 20% of the women do unpaid care work compared to 1% of men. So, as we say in my country, in Germany, behind each successful man, there is a woman. Yes, it's the woman who takes care of the children and the woman who irons the shirts so that he looks nice in the board meeting. So we need really to look in also beyond the workplace, but into the whole life approach. It's not only about workplaces and decent working conditions, but also to allow people, women and men, to have their space for taking their family responsibilities. And legislation can do a big part, but it's not all about legislation. We have to address a huge mindset change, and that, as we know, is quite difficult, and we need a long breath. So a couple of years ago, there was an estimate that if we continue with business as usual, it will take us more than 200 years to address and come to what we would want to see, and that is equality among men and women at work. So we still need this long breath, but we also need to start at not looking only in the leadership positions, but we also see that women are underrepresented in trade unions and also in employers' organizations. But that is where they have a voice and where they can make their point. And you can do that in each and every single workplace. And raising your voice is really important. And as a woman, also as a man, to address inequalities at work, be it gender-related or related to other discriminatory practices. I stop here, Rupa. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Christiana, for highlighting some key areas. One, that we need to have like a whole of life approach, and what's happening in the home and the household is as critical. This is a message that many of our speakers have really alluded to, and COVID-19 has reminded us that exactly we are seeing some of those ramifications of having stay-at-home orders, the economies and schools not necessarily being open, and women's on average have 2 to 3 hours of home and care responsibilities, and those are now doubling and tripling. So really a critical point there, and also about participating in unions and ensuring that as part of the Decent Work platform, organizing and collective bargaining are part of that decent work agenda, and to use that and ensure that women are part of it. So we're nearly at the end, but we do have time for a few questions. And so I want to encourage everyone that's tuning in, please submit your questions through the platform. We have one question that came in from Mirna. Mirna, you had a very powerful opening there talking about the local context in Lebanon. One of the questions that came up is very much around cultural context, and I'll also ask Miriam to touch upon this. But Mirna, for a question specifically to you is, how can we include the roles of women in Muslim countries without creating conflict with cultures and backgrounds of the society? And I'd like to expand that it's not just Muslim, but any religion and cultural realities that could be conflicting happening with the women's rights when it comes to leadership and voice. So Myrna, if you would like to chime in, and then I'll turn to Miriam to chime in from a different perspective as well. Thank you.
This is a very sensitive question, and this is what we usually face when we are trying to introduce change. So first, we have to understand the culture, and change has to be transformational from within the culture. And it's always advisable to create allies from people, key people within that culture. Try to take them as allies so that they can be your gatekeepers to be able to enter the heart, mind, and the culture of that culture. Because change, no matter how change is good for the people, it will always at the beginning be faced with resistance. So I think this is the approach that I usually follow in any culture or subculture that I would like to really enter or introduce change there.
Thank you, Myrna. I'm going to turn to Miriam, just building on that question. What can be done to fight against cultural stereotypes of women's leadership in the health sector? Miriam, you yourself are a woman leader that has broken many stereotypes already and a trailblazer. Can you share a little bit about what you're seeing in your on-ground reality in your current post or anything from previous posts that you've had?
Thank you, Rupa. I think what I experience and is that at the leadership level, it's the last mile of gender inequality that's very difficult to run. I think it's very easy when you're approaching gender equality and gender balance to look at maybe the less sort of like socioeconomic backgrounds, the poorest socioeconomic backgrounds in rural area, and say the problem is there. The problem is not with the leaders, and to sort of like try to approach the problem from we need to give economic income for women in rural areas, or we need to make sure that girls access education. So that's, I would say, the tip of the iceberg that is sort of like the most obvious thing to address. As you go up in your career or just advancing your career and get to the leadership position, I think the encounter is that what is the problem? You are in a leadership position. You are in a senior position. So what do you think is going to create challenges for you? There shouldn't be any. While we do know that there are still many challenges to access the leadership position, they are less visible. They are less. It's really the hidden part of that gender equality issue, and therefore less obvious to bring on the table to analyze and to point towards and to try and see what policies could address them. So we really need to continue pointing towards those inequalities that exist at the leadership position. I'm just going to give you an example. There are many women, for example, who are professors at university who teach students who have big research projects. But most of the time, it's very welcome that they are women scientists, that they are working on infectiology, virology, microbiology. A lot of the science is really led by women. But when it comes to try and get that evidence into decision making, then we are confronting this women's world to a men's world. And here's an example of the very subtle gender imbalance that still exists.
Thank you, Miriam. Very powerful example. And I think I'd like to turn it to Pavi. We have a question that really came in that the establishment of quotas is considered controversial, and yet voluntary measures are not as powerful as they're not binding commitments. What are your thoughts on imposing quotas as a country that has, made some of those policy and headways? How can quotas ensure the presence of women's leadership? And for those that are resistant to having quotas, what would you say from a government perspective? So Pavi, to you.
Thank you. I would say that, of course, it's about cultures, and of course, jump is not an easy. It's not as easy as take step by step proceeding. But I would say that transparency and sharing experiences is very powerful. And we have been talking about a lot in Finland about binding quotas, and then also not having that binding quotas. We don't have actually them in corporate governance, in corporate executive boards of directors, but there have been more and more a strong voice for having also that in binding quotas at the EU level there. And now we have achieved a number that there are 30% in our corporate executive boards are women, 30% already, and that's quite a good percentage. And one reason that there has been a discussion about not having quotas in the private corporates and in them executive boards has been that there is really an experience needed from top level positions. And therefore, I think that it's so important that we give women possibilities really and give them mentorships and everything so that they can really then proceed in their careers, so that no one can say that, okay, we can't have women because they don't have experience from leadership positions. And therefore, I think that we have to look this from different points of view, that we have to be able to say that we really have experienced women and knowledge there, that it is not only that we pick up some of the women's into the to the advisory boards and so on. But on the other hand, experience is so important that we have seen also in our public sector and governmental bodies then and advisory boards and committees, that when we really take both genders there, it really gives us a better view from different aspects there. So that is also very important. And we have that quotas in our legislation, but if there is a good explanation why we don't have 40% women or 40% men in some advisory boards, there is then possibility to explain that, and we can have also advisory boards or committees where we don't have men or male or women then 40%. And that is quite often what happens in health sector. There are a lot of women there. And for example, if we think about childcare or so on, so there are a lot of women then there, and sometimes we need experienced women to have there. But on the other hand, then when it deals with the defense sector or internal Ministry of Internal Affairs, for example, there is quite often males-dominated bodies, but that is changing. So keep going on and share experiences. We have to have that actively on during our health sector capacity building now and during the recovery phase. So Rupa, keep up the good work.
Thank you, Pavi, and all of us collectively. So we're nearly at closing at this point, but so I'm going to ask all of our panelists to give us our key takeaway message. But I am going to begin with actually asking Anne to kick us off with one of the questions that did come up, and if you can integrate this in your closing message, is changing the system seems as a midterm or long-term objective. So how can it be translated into short-term objectives, and what can be practical steps to taking action at the local and national level. So in your closing remarks, if you could touch upon that, Anne, please.
Thanks, Rupa. I don't think we have time for this to be a long-term agenda. I think this is urgent and we need to do it now. So there isn't time to say that we don't have time for gender equal leadership. If you keep an eye on the work of the Gender Equity Hub, we're about to produce policy guidance on this, and there are measures that can be taken at every different level of that ecosystem, from the law to paternity leave, etc., all the way down. And I think that you will find good examples, things that can be done immediately wherever you are. So stay tuned in. And when that is launched, I think you'll find that there is plenty that can be done, but this won't wait. Thanks, Rupa.
Thank you, Anne. Myrna, to you to close us off with your key takeaway message. Myrna, we can't hear you. Myrna, we can't hear you. If you can please unmute yourself.
Sorry, I was muted. Before my key take message, I'm unmuted.
You are. We can hear you now.
Hello?
We can hear you.
Okay. So I would like to start by thanking all the presenters for the fantastic presentation. The key message that I took from this is that investment in women's leadership would have a positive return on economy. And who does not want to improve the economy, the family economy, the country economy, and the global economy?
Great. Thank you, Myrna. Really great message there on the multiplier effect. I'd like to turn it to Andreas to also give us our key message. You had a very powerful point about partnerships. So turning it to you to close this with your key message.
Thank you, Rupa. I would like to invite you and all the audience to use the platform of UfM, in particular the agenda of women empowerment in the Mediterranean region. I would like to say, with my experience in working with this platform, this is a center of gravity of women leadership. Ministers of health, ministers of women and health and welfare are all women in these platforms, driving the agenda. Once agreed was the ministerial conference in Cairo, and the center point of this ministerial conference is women leadership in all parts of the society. So I would like really to reiterate, this platform is a huge chance to come in, to be active, and to play as an organization, as a scientist, as a civil society representative, and to make the women empowerment agenda moving. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andres. I'd like to invite Christiana with your key takeaway.
Thank you. Thank you so much. How to pack the world into one sentence, but I think when we talked about Miriam and Myrna about cultural issues, I think change is very important, and change starts with ourselves. So we are all in this, and whatever you as an individual and we as individuals can do, we should do it. So stand up, speak up. Thank you.
Great. Really great message there. And then I'd like it to turn it to Miriam for your key takeaway.
Thank you, Rupa. I will have the same key takeaway. I think this is the powerful message that we need to put forward. Stand up, speak up. Don't let anyone tell you that you're not entitled to say anything about gender inequality in your career, in your environment, in your work, and in your private life as well.
Thank you, Miriam. And then Pavi, to close us out with your key takeaway message for all of us.
Thank you. Mainstreaming is really an important thing, and whole of government approach. So why there is no mean to have only half of the potential in use. Women, be powerful. You know a lot.
Thank you, Pavi, and I think that's a really great final closing for all of us to really recognize that we need to use the 100% talent pool. We have a massive global health challenge we're facing, the pandemic, but we also know that we have an ambitious agenda to achieve universal health coverage. We know that there is an 18 million health worker shortage by 2030. These are all critical issues that our partners are working on. Really delighted to have collaborated with all of our partners, and a special thanks to the UfM for hosting this conversation, inviting us to speak about how do we really have gender equitable change in the social and health workforce. We know that action is needed, and now is the time. Please turn the applause of health workers into real action, to real investments in creating gender transformative policy at all levels. We know the ecosystem matters, and we can really transform it. So on that note, I'd like to say a special thanks to all of our panelists, our partners that made this possible. Please stay in touch with us. We do have the Gender Equity Hub, which is co-hosted by Women in Global Health and WHO as part of the Global Health Workforce Network. We have the platform that Andreas talked about, and we have all of those different organizations that are working on these issues. So please join us, stay connected with us, look out for the policy tool brief that we will be releasing in a few weeks. And a final reminder from the organizers is that these sessions will resume tomorrow morning. The first session is at 10, and it's going to be focusing on building equal, safe, and inclusive post-COVID-19 societies for women and girls. How can Mediterranean regions and cities take the lead? So what a great conversation to continue. This is being organized in collaboration with the Generalitat de Catalunya and the City Council of Barcelona. So thank you everyone for tuning in, and please stay engaged with us. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Mm.